9 a.m., maple title and escrow. The pen slid toward daughter. Husband smiled like paperwork was a magic trick. The closer's hand hovered. "Just a formality," husband said. I set a court order on the stack. The closer closed the drawer on the pen. The door opened. An officer stepped in. "Mr. Wyatt, you've been served." Husband's smile fell first, then the color. He looked at daughter for the old permission. It wasn't for sale anymore. That's how this story ends. The pen asleep, the house safe, the door opening to cold air that tastes like relief. But endings don't walk in by themselves. You have to show up with copies. 48 hours earlier, my stove clock glowed 3:11 a.m. I'm Ruth Ann Carter, 68, retired lunch lady, and the keeper of 4 recipes people actually ask for. People think elders shrink. I learned to stand still until the room remembers my name. The radiator tapped. The coffee went bitter. Daughter should have been sleeping across town in the little ranch on Sycamore Lane. Instead, trouble fogged the window and spelled out a plan. An EpiPen went missing. A deed appeared I'd never seen. And at the Bluebird Diner, behind a plastic Cetus, I heard husband say the quiet part out loud. "She'll sign the quitclaim at 9. Paperwork is just paperwork." Now here's what I know after a lifetime of cafeterias and courtrooms. Quiet isn't surrender. Paper is how America moves mountains. At 9, we would bring the truth on letterhead. Now let me tell you how we got from 3:11 a.m. to the pen going back in the drawer. The clock on my stove said 3:11 a.m., the little green numbers shining like stubborn fireflies. The radiator tapped a rhythm for nobody but me and the night. I stirred instant coffee and listened to a silence I've known before, the kind that isn't peace, but a rope tightening in your hands. I should have been asleep. On the other side of town, my daughter Hannah should have been asleep too, curled up under an old quilt in the house she inherited from my mama, the ranch on Sycamore Lane with the maple out front that drops leaves as big as dinner plates. But we weren't sleeping much these days. Trouble rarely lets you sleep. It stands outside your window, breathing fog on the glass. Hannah married a man named Darren Wyatt. He's handsome in the way strip mall gyms are handsome. Bright lights, mirrors, everything sprayed down to look clean. He likes rental cars that look more expensive than they are, and those shirts that never wrinkle, even when your conscience does. He says things like, "Let me handle the big stuff. You always get overwhelmed by details." He says it in a voice that could double as a podcast for men who think you win arguments by sounding like a spreadsheet. The big stuff has a habit of being Hannah's paycheck, Hannah's car title, and more recently, Hannah's house. People think control shows up in a bruise. Sometimes it's a missing spare key. Sometimes it's a PIN number you haven't been told yet because we'll get to it. Sometimes it's an EpiPen that lives in the front pocket of a diaper bag at 9 in the morning and mysteriously migrates by 3 in the afternoon when your little boy's face blossoms in hives because a neighbor shared a cookie with peanuts and your heart beats so hard you feel it in your ears. That Tuesday at St. Luke's Urgent Care, the light was too bright for calm. Hannah's hand shook so badly she could hardly unzip the bag. She said, "It was right here," like a prayer you say, even though you know you already missed a turn. The nurse was kind. She kept her voice flat and soft and handed me a cool cloth for Hannah's neck while she reached for an antihistamines. Mikey, my grandson, has those brown eyes that always look like he's about to laugh, even when he's about to cry. He sat very still for a 5-year-old and watched the nurse like she'd hung the moon. The hives faded.
We took him home. I insisted on stopping at the pharmacy for a new EpiPen before we even pulled into the driveway. Later that night, Hannah found the old one wedged deep in Darren's tool bag out in the garage. She held it up like a bone dug out of spring mud. She said, "Maybe it fell," and then her mouth closed on the rest of that sentence. We both heard how it sounded. I don't carry a lot of regrets. I've made peace with the fact that I stayed longer than I should have with Hannah's father because I mistook quiet for peace, and I mistook my own stubbornness for faith. I grew up on sermons about endurance and vows, and I can follow a recipe so exactly you'd think I carved the tablespoon myself. It took me too long to understand that God doesn't ask you to worship suffering. He asks you to love the truth like it's your own child. The day I left, I moved our couch by myself and scratched the paint and didn't care. I learned how to make a rent check stretch and how to patch a bicycle tire in under 10 minutes. I learned how a woman's jaw looks when she stops asking permission from her polite voice. 2 weeks after the urgent care scare, I was at the Bluebird Diner with my church friend Anita, sharing a piece of pecan pie because we were pretending to watch our sugar. The Bluebird smells like butter and disinfectant and old coffee, and the waitress has called me sweetheart for 15 years. I was sitting behind a fake ficus near the window because the sun warms that spot just enough to make your back stop complaining. Darren walked in with a tall man I didn't know, all shiny shoes and a smile that could cut paper. You can tell a lot about a man by how he laughs when he thinks nobody who matters is listening. Darren slapped his palm on the table and his voice carried like it always does. 9 a.m. at Maple Title, he said to the shiny friend. She's signing the quitclaim. Paperwork is just paperwork. She doesn't understand the financing, and honestly, thank God, we'll be in and out before coffee gets cold. The shiny friend chuckled. You sure she'll sign? Darren shrugged like a man swatting a fly. She's overwhelmed. I'll walk her through it. Worst case, we'll reschedule when she's calm. There's a lot on her plate. Kids, work, holidays. I mean, come on. She's never been good with stress. I put my fork down like it weighed a brick. I could have stood up and marched right then. Instead, I let my spoon rest in the melted ice cream and I listened to the radiator inside my chest quiet down. I don't shout in diners. I stare at the sugar packets until my hands stop shaking. Then I go home and make lists with a pencil sharp enough to cut rope. Anita asked me what was wrong. I said, I think I heard something I wasn't supposed to. And I took the rest of the pie home in a styrofoam box that squeaked in my purse every time I breathed. 2 days later, a windowed envelope from the county recorder landed in my Briar Oaks mailbox with Hannah's name shining right through. I don't open other people's mail. That day, I walked it straight to Hannah and made her open it at my round kitchen table with the sunlight coming in crooked through the blinds. She read with her lips. She has always done that, even as a little girl. Notice of recorded deed of trust. Sycamore Lane, she said, and the words broke in the middle like a stick you didn't know was rotted through. She folded the letter in half and then into quarters and then unfolded it again like it might blink and become kind. What do we do? She asked. We don't scream. We sort. Then I picked up my phone and called Sandy Mays at the courthouse because Sandy and I used to sing alto together in church before her shoulder went bad, and she has a way with the truth. She can't give legal advice. She can give a list of which windows to stand in front of and what words make a clerk's day easier. After Sandy, I called Safe Harbor, the domestic violence folks on Elm Street in the brick building with the mural that looks like a quilt. People hear domestic violence and picture a black eye. Those folks know how to hear the math you can't see, the way money gets moved around, the way a key goes missing, the way fear sits down at your table and starts giving you advice. At Safe Harbor, they offered granola bars and a phone charger and a chair where you don't have to sit up straight to be respected. They matched us with Attorney Delgado at Legal Aid of Greene County, who wears simple suits and speaks like a person who knows most lives are made out of paperwork and promises. Delgado asked questions and didn't flinch at the answers. We brought texts, we brought bank statements, we brought a photo on Hannah's phone of a notary stamp on a document she swore she'd never seen. Delgado nodded and wrote, and sometimes he just sat with his pen still, the kind of still that tells you he's listening without trying to outrun the silence. Officer Hart met us at Safe Harbor that same afternoon. He's a big man who moves like a quiet one, and he carries his notebook like it's a delicate animal. He asked if we felt safe. He asked about the EpiPen. He asked about the Bluebird Diner. He didn't roll his eyes when I said ficus. He said, "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," and sounded like he meant it. We filed for a temporary protective order because sometimes protection lives on paper first. Delgado filed for an injunction to block any transfer related to the house until a judge could get his glasses on the situation. He told us not to talk to Darren. He told us to keep a journal. He told Hannah to take a picture of the EpiPen's new home in the kitchen drawer with the silverware and to write down who had a key to the house now and who used to have one. He told me to make a list of every time Darren had asked for money or access to things that weren't his. I wrote on a yellow pad because yellow makes it harder to see what you're writing when you try to talk yourself out of it. That night, I tried to bake a pie and realized I'd measured the sugar with the salt spoon and thrown everything off by a handful of bitterness. Grief does strange math. I tossed the crust and sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea I didn't drink. The radiator tapped. The green clock watched me, patient. I wrote a few sentences on an index card like a recipe and tucked it under a magnet. Quiet isn't surrender. Paper is a mother's megaphone. Love is boundaries with supper on the table. When the clerk called with a court date, I felt my bones unclench one at a time. "We'll serve him this evening," Officer Hart said, like he was saying, "We'll take out the trash before it smells up the back hall." I thanked him, hung up, and called Hannah to tell her not to open the door to anyone but a pizza delivery she didn't order and would send away anyway. That night, my doorbell rang at Briar Oaks. It was Anita with peanut butter cookies in a tin and news about the Lions Club pancake breakfast on Saturday. "You coming?" "I can flip pancakes until my wrist gives out," she said. "Bring your wrist brace." We both laughed like women who have cried enough to know laughter's real job. The next morning, we were at Maple Title and Escrow before the nail salon opened next door. The sign on the door said 9 a.m., but the lights were already on. Miss Compton runs that office. She's the kind of woman you don't notice until you need something moved across the finish line. She keeps a sunflower mug on her desk and has a way of closing a file like tucking in a child. Hannah wore her navy cardigan that makes her look like the most competent person this side of the county line. I brought my church tote bag with copies of documents in a folder so full the clasp complained. Darren pulled up at 8:59, on time like men who think time itself winks at them. He held the door like a gentleman and said, "Ruth Ann," like we were PTA pals in line for bake sale tickets. He patted Hannah's elbow and said, "You look tired. We'll be quick." I told him we're in a rush.
Inside, the air hummed like all fluorescent rooms do. Miss Compton greeted us with a nod. Darren introduced his shiny friend, who could have been a cousin or a car salesman or both. Miss Compton slid a stack of papers across the desk as casual as a menu at a diner. "We'll start here," she said. Darren pushed a pen toward Hannah the way men push a chair up to a table for a child. He said, "It's just a formality," and smiled like formality had ever kept anybody safe. That's when Attorney Delgado stood. He placed a court order on top of the stack and said, in a voice that could steady a ladder, "Closing is enjoined. Miss Carter will not be signing anything today." He set a copy in front of Miss Compton and one in front of Darren, like coasters for a hot cup of coffee. Darren laughed. He has a laugh that works on people who need a charming man to tell them what to think.
"That order is ex parte," he said. "Temporary. You can't just show up and—" The door chimed. Officer Hart walked in exactly the way you want an officer to walk into a room where your daughter's name is on a stack of paper. Calm, like a good neighbor, careful with the air. "Mr. Wyatt," he said, "you've been served notice of the protective order and the injunction." He nodded at Miss Compton. "Ma'am?" Darren turned to Hannah, dropped his voice to the one he uses when he wants to sound like the only reasonable man in a room. "Honey, tell them you're overwhelmed. Tell them your mother is scaring you. We talked about this last night." Hannah didn't look at Darren. She looked at Miss Compton, who had already slid the pen back into the top drawer like she was putting away scissors before a toddler could get clever. "We're done here," Miss Compton said. It wasn't rude. It was a statement like sunrise. Darren leaned on the desk with both hands. "You're going to ruin me over a misunderstanding." He tried a smile that remembered being useful. "You did that when you hid the EpiPen and recorded a deed I didn't sign," Hannah said. Her voice didn't wobble. She didn't look at me. She looked at the file like a person looking at a fence they just finished building with their own hands. Darren's eyes flicked, the little flinch a man makes when he realizes a lie has to grow to keep up. Officer Hart didn't wait for the next lie. "Time to go," he said. "You're free to have your attorney contact legal aid. You're not free to proceed." We watched Darren leave. The door sighed shut. Miss Compton took a breath. She gave Hannah a tissue and me a nod some women know how to pass in a pinch, a nod that says, "I see you." And also, "I've been here before with someone else, and I'll be here again, and the file will close every time it needs to." People expect a win to feel like fireworks. It felt like breathing. It felt like a sore back easing 10% and a clock that doesn't glare so much. It felt like a cup of coffee going down without your stomach clenching at the swallow. After that, the story wasn't glamorous. It was the kind of months real life is made of. Calls returned, calls ignored, school forms filled out by a man from the hardware store who whistled under his breath and told me my maple out front needed a good trim before spring. The school counselor at Maple Glen Elementary met with Sadie in a small room with a poster that said, "Feelings aren't facts, but they matter." She asked clever questions that let a second grader say hard things and then go stick glitter on a paper turkey without confusion. Safe Harbor found Hannah a therapist who specialized in helping women get their voices back without shouting. Church ladies brought Wednesday casseroles and asked for Tupperware back only after they were sure you were done needing it. Darren tried every door a man like him tries. He sent texts at midnight that said, "We can work this out." He swung by the bus stop and stood far enough away to call it public space and close enough to make sure Hannah saw him. He talked at the gym in that breezy way, "My wife's going through something," so other men could feel sorry for him and for their own choices. He claimed the notary stamp was a misunderstanding. The county recorder flagged the document and Attorney Delgado filed another motion. The notary in question had a habit of stamping things after long lunches. Sometimes the system is a mess. Sometimes it works because one woman at a desk says, "Not on my shift." On a cold morning with a sun you could look at, we sat in a courtroom with gray carpet and an old flag that drooped like it needed coffee. The judge wore a blue tie and read quietly for a long time while we sat there holding our breath. Courtrooms aren't like television unless your television has old chairs and a ventilation hum. When he looked up, he spoke like a person talking to a neighbor across a low fence. He used the words injunction and set aside and custody arrangement and compliance class. He said the house on Sycamore Lane was Hannah's and would remain so, free of encumbrance. He told Darren to attend a course he wouldn't like. He told us to follow the schedule and the rules and to come back if we needed help. Attorney Delgado thanked him like a man who values routine and decency in equal measure. We walked out into the hallway where everything smells like paper and cleaner, and the janitor held the door for us and said, "Y'all take care now," the way people around here say amen when they don't want to get preachy. Outside, the winter air cut clean and kind. We stood there with our coats not quite buttoned, and Hannah looked at me like she was 8 again and I could fix a bicycle chain with a butter knife. I didn't say much. I've learned that relief doesn't need commentary. It needs dinner and an early bedtime. Saturday, we moved Hannah and the kids into the little ranch on Sycamore Lane for good. The neighbors came with a crock-pot of chili and a ladder taller than my courage. Mr. Nettles from 3 houses down brought a rake with 1 bent tine and an opinion about leaves that lasted the length of a medium-length sermon. The kids chalked a fox on the driveway with a tail that took 2 sticks of orange to get right. We hung curtains with daisies because daisies make a kitchen honest. The locksmith rekeyed the front and the back and the garage, and I watched each key cut like it was a small miracle stamped into brass.
That first night, after we checked that the smoke detectors had fresh batteries and the kids' nightlight worked and the back door latched tight on the first try, Hannah stood in the kitchen and put her palm against the doorway like she was swearing in. She didn't cry. She made macaroni and cheese out of the box because the kids at home comfort, and she put carrot sticks on the plate because comfort doesn't mean giving up on vegetables. We watched a movie where dogs talk, and everyone laughed at the wrong parts because laughter doesn't care if the timing is perfect. In the mornings after that, we made school lunches without hand shaking. Sadie went to reading buddies and read to a first grader who held her hand too tight and didn't want to let go when the bell rang. Mikey brought home a worksheet with a turkey whose feathers were made of traced fingers, and he wrote, "I am thankful for macaroni and grandma," without prompting. The nurse at St. Luke's gave Hannah an EpiPen training device and a pamphlet with pictures that made everything look simple. We practiced on an orange in the kitchen while Mikey watched with his eyebrows up like the orange might scream. The orange did fine. We threw it away afterward because that's what the paper said to do. Once, in the cereal aisle at Jansen's grocery, I saw Darren looking at boxes like one of them owed him money. He saw me and tried on a smile that didn't fit his face anymore. "Ruth Ann," he said, "we're all a little worked up. You've always been intense." "I call it accurate," I said. "I'm getting help," he said. "I've signed up for a finance course. I'm seeing someone. I'm not the bad guy you think." "I hope you learn what you need to learn," I said, "but you're not going to learn it from my daughter or her house." He opened his mouth. I shook my head once. "This conversation is over," I said. I turned my cart around and went back 2 aisles to look at paper towels I didn't need. Boundaries look like rudeness to people who liked you better with your hands full of apology. At the Lions Club pancake breakfast, Officer Hart bought a strip of raffle tickets the length of my arm. The shelter director spoke about how many women they'd helped this year and how many they couldn't, and we all clapped a little too long anyway. The men at the griddle flipped pancakes with wrists that have built houses and held babies and closed caskets and were still willing to show up on a Saturday. I worked the coffee station until my wrist sang, and Anita told me to sit. I ignored her twice and then sat on a 3rd try because even mules rest. On Wednesdays, the church ladies brought casseroles labeled in black marker on masking tape, chicken and noodles, tuna surprise with potato chips crushed on top like confetti. Someone made a salad mostly of Cool Whip and fruit cocktail and called it ambrosia because that's what you call it when you want children to take a second spoonful. On Thursday afternoons, I picked up Sadie from school because Hannah's new shift ran late. I watched a girl who used to curl into herself in the car seat lean forward and read road signs out loud like they were invitations. I slept through the night for the first time in months and woke up afraid because peace can be alarming when you've made a nest inside worry. I made coffee, the radiator tapped, the green clock watched me gently. I stood at my fridge and read the index card I'd written weeks ago and made a new one because sometimes the recipe needs an extra pinch of faith. Quiet isn't surrender. Paper is a mother's megaphone. Love is boundaries with supper on the table. Add relief is honorable work.
The judge's order said things that made the next months possible. It said where the kids would be on which weekends and how to handle the holidays without using a child as a calendar fight. It said Darren would complete a class and provide proof. It said the house was Hannah's free and clear, and any attempt to cloud it would be dealt with firmly. It said words that sound like stone and feel like warm bread if you've been hungry long enough. Darren sent 2 letters through an attorney offering compromises that sounded reasonable if you didn't know where the EpiPen had been. Delgado wrote back with sentences that did not apologize. The notary who had stamped a mystery grew quiet when the recorder's office called and the stamp was suspended, and maybe that woman learned something she didn't want to learn about lunches and long afternoons and how a stamp is not a magic trick that erases consent. I hope she did. I don't need to know. In March, the maple out front began to bud. I swept the porch steps with the straw broom that's been mine longer than most of my opinions. Mikey came outside in his socks because 5-year-olds think weather is a rumor. I shut the door quickly behind him, just like the school counselor taught us. Lock behind, check latch, keys in pocket. We have a little ritual now. We open the door, we say lock together. We lock, we say check, we say keys, we pack pockets. Ritual is how you teach your bones it's safe to be here. One afternoon, my friend Anita planted marigolds along the walkway because marigolds are cheap and cheerful and rude to rabbits. We drank lemonade on the porch and watched a UPS truck turn around twice on our block like it forgot itself. You remember when you thought quiet meant peace? I remember when I thought yelling meant strength, I said. We sat there, 2 old women with knees that tell us the weather, and we did not bless our enemies. We blessed our daughters and our grandkids and the locksmith. At the spring fair at Maple Glen Elementary, Hannah volunteered at the ring toss and came home with a sunburn in a perfect cardigan-shaped rectangle. We bought a jar of pickles from the 4-H table and a scented candle that claimed to smell like laundry day, which just smelled like candle. The principal asked me to work the cakewalk because I can speak into a microphone without making everybody's shoulders jump. When a little boy won and didn't want cake because his tummy hurt from excitement, we gave him a loaf of bread and a sticker, and it was the right choice. I'd like to tell you Darren turned into a gentleman overnight. He didn't. He became less noisy in our direction. He became a man whose loudest unhappy habits didn't reach our window. He became someone the judge recognized by name and tone when he didn't get his paperwork in on time. Maybe that humility will learn to sit down with him at breakfast. It's none of my business unless it walks up our driveway. And even then, it's a matter for paper and Officer Hart, not for a midnight argument on the porch.
I still see him sometimes. Maple Glen is small enough that your ghosts shop at the same grocery store. He nods, I nod. We do not speak. It is a strange kind of grace to be invisible to a person who learned your weak spots by heart and tried to turn them into a map. On Mother's Day, Hannah made me pancakes with too much vanilla because the cap popped off, and we ate them anyway with strawberries I sliced so thin they might as well have been garnish. Sadie brought home a construction paper flower with a poem that rhymed love and dove, like all the best poems do in 2nd grade. Mikey wrote, "Grandma makes noodles," on a line that asked for a favorite thing and then looked at me for applause. He got it. Sometimes at night, I drive past the Bluebird Diner and park across the street just to see the neon sign blink on and throw that soft red light over a dozen slices of pie under glass. I think about that morning behind the ficus. I think about how close we came to losing something you can't buy back at any price. I think about how a woman with a sunflower mug slid a pen into a drawer and changed the whole world by doing her job exactly as if it mattered. I think about how many hands touched our safety. Sandy at the courthouse, the nurse at St. Luke's, the woman who stapled a packet at Safe Harbor, the secretary at Legal Aid who told me to take a deep breath before she transferred me, the judge with the blue tie, the janitor who held the door, the locksmith, the neighbor with the bent tine rake, the man at the hardware store who cut the keys.
We like to tell stories about heroes who arrive on horses. My heroes arrive in tan sedans with coffee cups and paper clips and stubbornness. If you're listening to this because you don't sleep well anymore or because your stove clock keeps you company, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to testify that quiet doesn't mean giving up. Sometimes it means gathering yourself like a quilt and walking down to the county courthouse with a folder and a friend. Sometimes it means letting a woman behind a window see your shaking hands and not pretend they're steady. Sometimes it means sending a child to school on time with lunch money and a note to the teacher and that look on your face that says, "We're okay. We're better than okay. We're living exactly where we're supposed to." I keep 3 index cards on my fridge now, under the magnet shaped like a rooster. The first one says what I wrote the night the radiator was tapping too loud for my nerves. Quiet isn't surrender. Paper is a mother's megaphone. Love is boundaries with supper on the table. The second one says, ask for help and take it. The third one says, when the title office opens at 9, show up with your dignity ironed and your copies made. A week ago, I took Hannah and the kids to the fall festival at the fairgrounds. We bought kettle corn that made our hands sticky. We lost each other twice and found each other 3 times. We sat in the stands and cheered for high schoolers throwing batons in the air under stadium lights, and none of us thought about who used to sit beside us because the seats were full of now. On the drive home, the kids fell asleep in the back. Hannah turned down the radio and said, "Sometimes I don't recognize this piece. It's so quiet, I think it's a trick." I said it's not a trick. It's what happens when you stop letting other people name your life. Back at Sycamore Lane, we carried 2 sleeping children inside like precious furniture and set them down with the gentleness you save for babies and the aged. The maple leaves crackled under our shoes. The porch light hummed. We locked the door. We checked. We patted pockets. We laughed at ourselves and did it one more time for the ritual of it. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, stared out at the yard where a plastic slide sat like a promise, and I thought about all the cupboards in America with EpiPens in the right drawer and legal papers in the right folder, and women who finally learned that no can be a full sentence, delivered in a calm voice with good posture. I went home to Briar Oaks and made tea. The radiator tapped, but not like it had a grievance. The little green numbers on my stove said 9:03 p.m., and for once I didn't feel like they were watching me. I put my hand on the fridge and thought about how many recipes are really just lists of steps someone wrote down so the next person could do a hard thing without having to guess. That's all this is, really. Not a miracle, not a revenge story. A recipe for getting your life back in a town where the diner waitress calls you sweetheart and means it, and the title office opens at 9 on the dot, and if you bring your papers and your stubbornness and your daughter and you're quiet, the woman with the sunflower mug will close the drawer on the pen, and you will walk out breathing easier than you did when you walked in.
I don't hate Darren. Hate makes old women bitter, and I've got grandbabies to babysit and marigolds to water. I wish him the chance to learn the lesson without breaking anyone else on the way. My wish comes after my line in the sand and not a second before. You don't have to wish good things for people who have harmed you while they're still in the room. You can wish things for them from across the street, behind the ficus with your car keys in your pocket and a pie cooling somewhere you can't smell it anymore because you've had enough sugar for one lifetime. If you need one last word from me, here it is. When you hear a man in a booth say, paperwork is just paperwork, remember this is America, where paper can move mountains and men and houses. Paper is just the way we write down what we've decided to stand for. Decide what you stand for before the pen comes out. Show up early. Bring your copies. Wear shoes you can walk in.
And when the officer nods at you and the clerk stamps your file and the door opens onto cold air that feels like washing your face in a sink at dawn, take a breath you've owed yourself for years and step into the life you're building on purpose. That night when I went to bed, I didn't pray long. I thanked God for boring paperwork and stubborn women and men with steady notebooks and nurses with gentle hands. I thanked him for the Lions Club, for casserole labels, for keys that turn, for a maple tree that will keep dropping big messy leaves every year, like blessings that don't even pretend to be tidy. I thanked him for my daughter's voice holding steady in a fluorescent room. I thanked him that when quiet came back, it wasn't a rope, it was a blanket. And I slept like someone whose stove clock doesn't need to keep watch anymore because the house is being watched by locks and neighbors and a woman who learned to stand still like a lighthouse instead of shrinking into her chair. In the morning, I woke to sunlight like butter on toast. I made coffee and didn't stir it like a storm. I packed a lunch for myself because a woman my age forgets to eat when she forgets she's not carrying the world alone. I opened the back door and let the cold in like a friend. And somewhere across town, my daughter leaned against the kitchen doorway and touched the wood like a promise, and 2 kids ran down a hallway in socks and laughter, and the maple out front tossed a handful of leaves into the air like confetti nobody had to sweep up right away. That's the ceremony. That's the pen in the drawer. That's the sound of a family choosing itself every morning with coffee and car keys and a checklist on the fridge and a recipe you can follow with your eyes closed if you need to. If you ever find yourself awake at 3:11 a.m. with the radiator tapping and your heart tapping back, come sit by me and I'll make you tea. We'll write a list. We'll call Sandy. We'll call Safe Harbor. We'll breathe. We'll stand still until the room remembers our names. And at 9, we'll go where the paper lives and we'll tell the truth with our mouths and our documents. And when we come home, we'll eat something warm and we'll rest. Quiet can be a weapon. Quiet can be a cradle. The trick is knowing when to pick it up and when to set it down. I didn't always know. I know now. And I'm telling you so you don't have to scratch your paint moving a couch alone unless you want to.